and it's really hard because you're going to hit those points, in December and January and even in early February where you're stuck on, maybe it's like, I've pulled the same split now. The last 2 times I tested, what's going on? Why am I not breaking through? And instead of trying to then go at it harder, like, you don't necessarily have to hammer harder in those moments. Sometimes you just have to trust the training. Like, show up the next day, train the session at the desired intensity level, hit your numbers, like, continue to just be consistent. Trust the consistency, trust the training, and know that if you're doing all of that and you're recovering, you're taking care of yourself outside of the 2 hours that you're training with your team, you're going to see the breakthrough eventually. You will.
Are you ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, let's do it again.
All right, we're gonna jump right in. So for everyone listening, we have Delaney McGuire here, someone who needs no introduction because she's already been on the podcast 4 times. It is her 4th time, and with less than 40 episodes in, you've literally been here greater than 10% of the episodes, and there's a reason for that, because we love talking about rowing, we love talking about training, we love talking about habits and goals and setting athletes up for long-term success. And for Delaney, her day job, her real job is obviously Eastern Michigan as the assistant coach and recruiting coordinator out there for, a program that I'm excited to learn a little bit more about today. Obviously, I know a lot already, but I know they're doing some great things out west. And then also she was helping us out this summer for our ATT summer training program. And like I said, like, Delaney's someone that can come on and it's easy because we're always going to have something to talk about. And we have some things that we want to dive in today, training, habits, and all that fun stuff. But Delaney, we'll kick things off here in a second. But for everyone listening, I just want to make one quick announcement, or just shout out to all the people up in Boston, right? Delaney was up there in Boston. They were racing, they had a couple boats up there, an 8 and a 4, which we'll talk about here in a second. But for everyone listening, because I know a lot of you were actually up there in Boston, I just want to give you a quick shout out. Like, this, having a tent up in Boston, literally right by the Elliott Bridge, Vineyard Vines tent at the biggest regatta in the world, the amount of people that came up to the tent and shook my hand or asked about the podcast or said how it's positively impacted their rowing journey, whether you are a coach, right? There were coaches that came up who I didn't even know prior to them introducing themselves. There were people that were athletes who were massive fans of just the social media, but also the podcast. And there were also parents that literally said, I'm creating a connection between my son or daughter through the words that you guys bring into the podcast. And it was truly amazing. I felt like the amount of people that came up, I was literally on phase 2 of every conversation because they knew a little bit about me, and it just made the conversation very authentic. And obviously for the really dedicated fans, they probably know a lot about you too, Delaney, because I think these are some of our most listened episodes, the ones that we dive into. So anyway, wanted to give a quick shout out to the podcast as we are fresh off of what was probably the biggest event in this brand's short life's history, the At the 1,000 brand. So it was pretty awesome being up there. But with that, last piece, and then we'll get started, Delaney. If this podcast brings you a lot of value, let's shoot it to the moon. Rate it, share it with your team, share it with your teammates, share it with your kids, your organizations, whatever. Send this one specifically because that will feature Delaney as well, because obviously she's a reoccurring guest, but share it. Let's get it out there. Let's get the message out there. We're continuing to evolve rowing. Delaney, tell me about Boston. Tell me about what you guys had going on there. Let's kick things off. Let's have some fun in the next hour. And I'm motivated now. Now I got that off my chest. I'm ready. We're good. All right, Delaney, kick things off. Give a little bit of a summary of Boston, what you guys did up there.
Yeah. So for the first time, we took a bigger group up. So typically in our history, we've raced the Club 8. And this year we actually decided to enter a Champ 4 and a Club 8. So one, just the competitive selection process for that was fun in the weeks, leading up to it, having, a few more seats available, to those who wanted to work for it. So that was fun to watch, leading into it. And we felt like going into it, we had selected 2 really solid crews. The 4 for them, this was a step up for them, having, two of them raced in the Club 8 last year in Boston, but we had 2 new rowers and a new coxswain to Boston in our Champ 4. So a young boat, and inexperienced in Boston at least. So, and we put them out there against some of the best crews that were lining up collegiately this weekend. So I think, it was a big learning process for them, big learning curve to kind of get out there and see what some higher speed was. I think they got pushed a little bit outside on the first turn, and they had some legwork to make up for that in the latter half of the race. But they did a nice job kind of grinding themselves back and like looking at their splits. They did make their time back up as they progressed through the race. Unfortunately, it was just not quite enough, come the finish line. But our Club 8 too, another really young crew. I think coxswain never been to Boston, and probably about 6 of the 8, I think, were new to Boston as well, and a few who were novices last year. So really fresh to this level of competition, which was great for us. Like just to get that number of athletes up there to experience, the greater world of rowing outside of Ford Lake in Eastern Michigan. So the 8 did a great job. They executed really well. They put themselves in a position with, some other schools 1v8s and top 8 athletes where, we're racing a boat that was a mix for us. So we were pretty happy about that, but also, looking at both boats, we kind of have a really good idea of where we need to go in winter training. So we've got about 2 more weeks left on the water. We have a home race this weekend against Dayton, and then our fall racing season is wrapped up after this weekend. We'll stay on the water for 1 more week after that, and then we're going to hit the ergs. So I think, it's really, really good information to have as we make that transition off the water.
Yeah. And I know, I'm curious to ask you, like, in all the conversations, like I talked to more coaches this past weekend than I have in probably, my 6 years as a Division I college coach. Like, it was just, having conversations with coaches and things like that. And it's always fun to hear the motivation for the fall, and in particular Boston. Like, I think at the high school level, like, it's everything being up at the Charles, like, it's everything. And you can kind of hear that in the voices of the athletes and the coxswains who are doing it for the first time. Like, it's what they put in their calendar, and it's like, hey, I got to make that boat. I got to go. Probably very similar to, I would say probably a lot of college rowers have that same kind of feeling about Boston. They want to make that boat because it's that centerpiece of the fall that you can build around. And then it's fun to hear from like the coaches, especially the college coaches, like, okay, like, you can kind of experiment and use it as an opportunity where, number one, yeah, it's the biggest regatta in the world. Someone actually said this when I was up there. People kind of know if you're not there. They can kind of, they're like, if you're not racing at the Charles, they kind of know, right? And, as a recruiting thing, and whether there's truth to that or not, it kind of makes sense. It's like, it's the one that's kind of on, the front lines of every regatta in the fall, especially. So people kind of know if you're not making a presence as a team. But college coaches probably have a little bit of a different they put it in a different level of the priorities in terms of like, okay, we have to go up there and put our best foot forward because, Boston is everything. I think in many ways, I'm curious to hear from you. Like, you experiment with an 8 and a 4. You obviously, I know, probably were able to connect with a lot of recruits up there. It was a great maybe team builder trip as well. But like, where does Boston fit into the landscape of fall training, fall racing? Where does head racing in particular, right, the fall season, integrate with the entire bigger picture of what is the primary objective of Eastern Michigan and any Division I rowing program? Elaborate on that.
Yeah. I think for us, Boston's always on the calendar. I think it's an exciting thing to have on the calendar, both for us as coaches and for the athletes. It gives a little bit of a carrot, I think, with summer training and getting back in September and making sure that we're on track with where we want to be, erg speed wise, getting out on the water, executing. But we try not to make it into something bigger than it is. At the end of the day, it is just another head race. It just happens to be very crowded and exciting. But at the end of the day, like, when we get out on the water, it's all just about executing our training, the technical changes we've been trying to implement. So it fits right into our fall training plan, really. So we're not doing anything special to peak for Boston or anything like that. I mean, we had a 6K test the Wednesday before we flew up to Boston. So it's business as usual, training wise, leading into that weekend. And then our goal that we gave both of our crews for the weekend, it was twofold. One, to make your world small. So stay in your boat. You're going to get out there. There's people yelling and screaming the whole way up on your warm up, the whole way down on the course. There's boats everywhere. There's a lot going on. Can you stay internal to your boat and row and execute what we've been working on in practice? And that was, once you're on the course, we've been really drive oriented this fall. So we've been looking to make some changes on our drive phase and how we're getting through the water on the drive. And so that's really what we were looking for as we saw them coming down the course, looking to see if those technical changes that we've been working on are showing. And we definitely saw signs of that, which was encouraging for us. But it's just another step in the process towards our greater goal being, in mid-May, our conference championship. So, and I think it's important, like mindset wise, not to make too big of a deal out of it, because you don't want to fall on that far end of like the psychological spectrum of like, now you're too nervous and anxious about it because you're making it into a bigger deal than it is. So that was another thing that we tried to be cognizant of, is like, we're going up to race. But also it's a great experience to get our young athletes up there to see, okay, there's a lot more out there. There's a lot of speed. There's a lot of crews. There's a lot to the world of rowing, and getting them to get to immerse themselves in like the culture of our sport, I think is a really cool, fun aspect of going to Boston.
And that last part, especially, like I always say, like the Head of Charles, it's more like a festival than it is like a rowing race, right? It's a regatta, like it's a festival regatta, rather than like a specific rowing event. Like it, the spectacle of it, everything else that goes in it, the people that you get to talk to. Like I got to experience that way more than I have in my other 7, 8, 9 times that I've been there as a coach or an alum, racing, whatever. Like, and it became even more true, this weekend. Like it is, like it's the event itself, to expose your athletes to that, I think is a big thing. It's definitely something that you want to have on the calendar if you are fortunate enough to kind of make it and qualify and all that. Like, but it's just interesting to hear, like, okay, well, I think it comes to some of what we're going to dive into a little bit today. Like high school rowing may be a little bit more shorter term focused in their, we want to put emphasis, and I'm not saying that as like a knock against them. It's like, hey, like you want to go there and represent. The college programs are maybe on a little bit of a longer time horizon in terms of when they're trying to really peak, right? And really, or what they're really trying to prep and prioritize, which is training, development, focusing on specific technical changes, so that when you gear up for the winter, you're now ready to really, push the pace and do everything you can to prep for the spring, which is obviously the most important season. High school might be a little bit more centered around, hey, like this is a big event for us. This is one that we can rally around. This is one that we can, put our best foot forward for. So we're going to go all in on this experience. And then they obviously have races coming up in the next few weeks too. Shout out, we're going to be down at the Head of Schuylkill with the tent as well. So if you are there, come by. Tent round 2, right? ATT tent round 2. Anyway, but they have multiple fall races, the head of Charles being one of them, that they're really gearing up for. But with that, and I think that this kind of dovetails into kind of some of the stuff that we wanted to talk about today. Like you guys have, and speaking more towards that long-term time horizon, and you guys have another, smaller race coming up, obviously, right? A duel, or, a smaller race against Dayton. But then you are getting a little bit more time on the water before you pack it in and gear up for the winter season, the off season. And that's obviously an area that I love talking about. I know you do too, because we both understand the importance of the erg and off season and athletic development, strength and conditioning, and all the different things that give you an opportunity to really lock in on fitness and pushing your training forward rather than just focusing on the weekly race execution, which, we'll probably get into in terms of like how that really does that really drive it the same way as the winter season does. But as you guys gear up, like, what are those internal conversations amongst you as coaches, or just you personally, in terms of, okay, like if you're an athlete and you're gearing up for a winter season, where are you starting? Because every athlete will be there in about 1 to 2 weeks, right? When they wrap up the spring or the fall, they'll be in that same position where they're starting to think about training. What would you say, like, where kick things off for us in terms of like thinking about, okay, the off season and setting goals, and what are you trying to get out of those 3-4 months that you have to be more focused on inside the erg room and training facilities? Like, kick that conversation off for us, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think for me, this part of the off season in particular, at least when I was an athlete and as a coach, is the most exciting part, because you're now shifting gears from, being one piece of a boat to, it is a little bit more individualized. So you get to really like take a look at your own self and your own training and where you are at as an individual, and kind of figure out like the path forward for yourself, and you get to be a little bit more selfish about, what you do over the next couple of months, and leading especially into, for most college programs and even some high school programs, you have this weird time off, like right smack dab in the middle of the school year coming up in December. Like we have winter break. There's no practice, but does that mean that you don't train? What does that look like for you as an individual? And when I was an athlete, I always got excited for those times of year because I knew that I was going to get to work and try to do a little bit more than maybe some others might be doing to try to get a leg up heading into January when the team comes back together. But I think it's a really good time to just reflect, like, okay, where was I this fall? Speed wise on the team. Was it a place that I felt, pretty good about? Did I feel like, the work I did over the summer paid off, or did I feel like maybe I didn't do enough over the summer? And, a few people passed by me that I was upset, about where I ended up. Now you have an opportunity again to get back to work on yourself and kind of figure out where you want to go in the new year. So that's usually how I think of it. And you've probably got a couple of tests that you've done this fall. Like we 6K'd last week. So I would use that as a benchmark. Like, okay, that's where I was end of October. Where do I want to see myself in January? Like we'll probably test again before we break for December, but that last October 6K is a good place to start and look at it like, all right, is that in a good spot for me, or do I need to get to work a little bit?
All right, what's up, everyone? Kevin Leslie, and quick interruption to the podcast to tell you about the At the 1,000 Collective. The ATT Collective is an online community for high school rowers who want to better position themselves for long-term success at the college level. And in the collective, you're going to be invited to 2 group coaching Zooms per month, featuring top coaches, elite athletes, rowing experts, where we're going to dive into topics centered around training, rowing performance, college recruiting, personal development, you name it. You're also going to get an opportunity for a live Q&A where you can ask individual questions to help set you on your own path. You're also going to receive a weekly newsletter with erg workouts, core circuits, tips and tricks for rowing and recruiting, and also highlights from any previous Zooms so you can begin to incorporate those into your own practice. Lastly, you're going to get unlimited access to all ATT online courses and programs, most notably the Erg First, Row Second online course, where you can begin to do some training at your own pace. So the purpose of this program is to help athletes get the information and guidance to help them take that next step and feel prepared heading into college rowing. So if you're interested in joining, we're offering 50% off your first month. Go to the description below, grab the code, and we hope to see you in the next Zoom. And you'll also receive your first newsletter as soon as this upcoming week. So again, join the community. Let's have some fun. Let's keep pushing and evolving our rowing. And I hope to see you soon. Now back to the show. Peace. I find that I like what you said about you have, however way you phrase it, like you have this data point, like you have this these results that have materialized over the last couple of months of the fall to basically bring on paper, like, okay, was the work that you did in the summer enough to now fast forward to the end of fall, feel like you're in a position, the position that you wanted to be in, right? Did you do enough in the summer, which is an off-season time, right? The winter's an off-season, the summer's an off-season. Did you do enough in the summer where, okay, well, now with a lot of new data points through the fall, both in terms of erg results, race results, right, whatever it may be, where you were in the boat, right? Did you make the boat that you wanted to be in? You now have data points, real tangible ones that you can now at this time now here at the end of fall, right, which is fastly approaching, you can use that as real evidence of, okay, did I do enough in the off season in the summer to feel like I'm in the position I wanted to be at the end of the fall? And then you can now think in terms of, okay, where do I want to be by the end of winter to maybe have a new outcome come end of spring or beginning of spring through the end of spring. And that's the beauty of the off season. That's the beauty of training and having a time where the entire focus is on training, on development, on getting faster, getting stronger, getting fitter, getting more durable so that you can withstand the workload that's to come when you are back on the water. Like that's what the winter's all about. That's what in my opinion, and I know you're very similar, that's what the summer's all about to help prep you for the fall, right? And the winter's an opportunity where we can really take ownership of that process and really, you can change a full narrative in 3-4 months and be a completely different person in the spring. And I know you've seen it on your team. I've seen it in my teams or with the athletes I work with through the winter. Like it's the best time to truly change a narrative or evolve a narrative about yourself and your rowing journey. So with that, like, what are things that you think are like, okay, like if you are an athlete who you're here at the end of fall, and this could be pertain to a high school athlete, this could pertain to a college athlete, one of your athletes, whatever it may be, and you don't feel like you fully realized your potential in the fall, right? You didn't maximize the opportunity that the fall gave you. And now you're sitting here at the end of fall after the biggest race of the season. Maybe you were left out of it. Maybe you were in it, but you didn't do that as well as you wanted to. And you're reflecting and you're asking yourself, okay, like I need to make a change because I don't want that same outcome come springtime and spring racing season. Take this wherever you want, Delaney, but like, where is that athlete starting if they want to flip the script and better optimize their winter off season to be in a better spot come spring?
Yeah, I would start at how consistent were you with your training this fall? Did you complete each training session? Maybe there was an injury that happened. Maybe there was some illnesses where you were in and out a little bit. Like you have to take a serious look at the story. Like there's nothing wrong with going through an injury. There's nothing wrong with going through an illness, but that's missed training time. And we're a sport of consistency. So consistency builds over time. And at the end of that time, like eventually you're going to get a result. But I think if you're really honest with yourself and you look at like, ooh, okay, I missed 2 days this week, and then I missed a day the next week, and then I was, you were in and out, in and out, in and out. That's one place to look. Okay, what can I do to better my consistency? Was I missing for illnesses and injuries because I was under recovered, because I was not sleeping enough, because I was not fueling well, hydrating well, right? Like taking care of yourself. There's some things that, an injury happens and it was going to happen, even if you were taking the best care of yourself, that's fine. It happens. But some stuff, nagging stuff comes from just being under recovered, and under prepared. So can you be prepared and healthy to be at training every day? Then the next layer to it is once you're there every day, what does the effort look like? Are you consistently striving to get a little bit better every time you touch the machine or get in a boat? So I think of it as like the difference between working out and training. Like you can go to the gym every day, you can hop on, name a machine, right? Do 30 to 60 minutes, leave the gym, go about your day and come back and do the same thing the next day. And you don't keep track of how fast you ran, how long you were on, whatever, versus training where, there's a specific goal for the day. Whether you're doing steady state, you're doing anaerobic threshold, you should have a split goal, a range that you want to be in. And if you're able to complete that, the next time you come back to that workout, can you go a little bit faster than you did the last time you did it? Because if you're not progressing down in speed, you're also not really realizing the full potential that's there, right? And that's where I think there's the difference between working out and training. You can go and show up and break a sweat and you're working out, or you can go in with a goal, hit the goal, you're training, right? And that goal fits into the bigger picture of the full week, the full month, the full year of training. So that's the second layer. And then I think the last layer is like a little bit of like the mental side of it is like, do you believe that you can get to where you want to go? Right. So like people talk about, oh, well, I want to make the 1B, but do you actually believe that you can? And do you believe that you can make the 1B and make the 1B faster? Like there's also a difference between making the boat versus making the boat faster. And if you're an athlete that's already in the top boat in your program, how'd the boat perform? Because there's no next boat up to get to. So how'd the boat perform this fall? And what can you do as an individual to change that outcome in the spring? So if you're feeling like, well, I don't have another boat to shoot for, I'm pretty like happy where I am, I'm in the seat I want to be in, I'm pretty solid. Okay. But what can you do to enhance that boat's experience in the fall or in the spring? So I think there's like layers to it, but I think my base is consistency. I think like the longer I've myself been training and, helping athletes in their journey, the athletes that are the most consistent showing up every day, and completing training, you end up having the best outcomes at the end of the day as compared to the inconsistent athlete or the, I hit it really hard one day and then I'm not paying attention to what pace I'm going at the next day. Their consistency is like your baseline.
No, I echo the same thought. Like that's probably the most common word I say to athletes, anyone actually, in doing anything, right? It's like, if you're not consistent, it ain't going to happen. Right. Like, and it's one thing to be like, okay, like, and I want to ask you another question, kind of piggybacking off of that, but it's like, it's one thing to be consistent, for 1 or 2 weeks and then completely, let it slide. Right. Or miss one workout and then that leads to another one. And especially for athletes who are in a fall program, right? If we speak to high school athletes or even college athletes, where it's a little bit more structured and, you have kind of a true 8 to 10 sessions per week that you're diving into, maybe even a little bit more if you're doing some extra work and stuff like that. Most high school athletes, like your 5 or 6 sessions, which I'm openly going to say is not enough, in my opinion, to really move the needle forward, especially when half of them, if not all of them, are on the water. Because again, like, my opinion is on the water is we don't get fitter on the water. We refine our craft on the water. We get fitter in the erg room and strength training, right? That's how we get stronger and fitter and faster. But with that, one of the things that I just had a conversation yesterday, actually, with, a couple parents and stuff like that, or a parent. And one of the conversations that we're talking about is like, hey, like, if they want to get to their results, do they need to add this session, this session, and do all this, and be incorporating these strength training sessions and this, like, and this and that? And I know this athlete, I know them pretty well. And my advice to that individual or the parent was, it's not necessarily about adding extra sessions that's going to lead you. What you first need to start with is maximizing your current sessions. So if you are struggling to maximize those 5 or 6 sessions per week, and even if they are on the water, you can get a lot of value out of those water sessions. Don't get me wrong, right? Just because they're not in front of the erg monitor or in the weight room doesn't mean they're not valuable. They're incredibly valuable, if not more valuable. But if you're not maximizing those sessions to their fullest potential, if you're just, letting that time pass and not taking advantage of it, any extra sessions that you're not, or that you are considering adding, you're just building a foundation, or you're building a structure on a foundation of sand. You're not moving, eventually it's going to come tumbling down because you're not taking advantage. You're not maximizing the 5 or 6 sessions that you already have on your plate. Right. And dive into that a little bit for me, if you don't mind. Just like, okay, like if you're an athlete and you're considering adding extra sessions into your weekly routine because you did satisfy that 5 or 6 sessions, right? You are pushing yourself and getting the most value, whether that's technical changes, quality of stroke, the physiological aspect of being on the water, right? You're maximizing, you're getting everything you can out of those sessions. And now you're trying to incorporate a little bit of training on your own where you are a little bit more siloed, where it's you and your own progress. And I know this is something that you have experience with on a daily basis. This is something that I have experience with on a daily basis, right? With my own exercise and training and all that, right? Different intensities probably compared to a lot of the athletes that we coach, because we don't need to do the stuff that they're doing. But we do have a lot of experience training on our own. And shed a little bit of advice to those athletes who do have the groundwork covered with the team stuff, and they're trying to embark on their own path and incorporate some additional training on their own.
Yeah. Training on your own, I think the first thing is understanding the intensity necessary for those sessions. More than likely, high school, college for sure, and 9 out of 10 high schools probably, you're getting enough hard work in the sessions that you're doing with your team. So I think most coaches would probably agree with me. If you're going to do training on your own, make sure the intensity is dialed back a little bit. You don't have to go really hard, but you still want to get quality minutes. So you have to find that sweet spot, that steady state, that easy aerobic zone. And in my opinion, for it to really help you move the needle forward, it's got to be probably at least 45 minutes to an hour. I think anything less than 45 minutes, more than likely, is probably not actually going to help move you where you want to go. But keeping the intensity low allows you to build a little bit more aerobic endurance while also helping you to recover a little bit. It's also like a recovery tool of getting your body moving, especially if you've had a heavy lift or a hard session earlier that day. You're feeling a little bit sore and stiff. Oftentimes a little bit of movement can be really helpful. You don't want to go and overtax the system again, but getting moving can actually be really helpful to rebound you for the next session the next morning. I'm just thinking in terms of college, hit a hard session this morning, recover this afternoon so that you're then dialed back in for tomorrow morning. But the other thing about extra training on your own is and this is something I struggled with as an athlete, so I'm bringing it to the forefront for those athletes that are listening who are going to do the same thing. You also have to know when it's better to just not, and to rest, to actually just go home and rest. Hitting that extra 60 minutes, if it means that you're then going to be sleep deprived for the next day to get it in, probably not worth it. If you're trying to jam it in at 8 p.m. at the end of the day, probably better for you to just go to bed, and sleep and get ready for tomorrow morning's session that way. You have to know when it's too much. So you do have to be careful, right? You don't want to overcook yourself. And then your day-to-day training suffers a little bit.
And building off of that, because that's something that I love diving into. And we both talk a lot about habits and routines and, being able to control what you can control, to be able to stay consistent, which again is that key word that we're always going to come back to. But for you, and you had a little bit of rowing experience when you were at the high school level, right? A little bit before you eventually went off to college, and that's been kind of what and obviously now what you are continuing to take ownership of as a long-time college coach. But put yourself in the shoes of the high school athlete for a little bit. Let me put on Coach Delaney's high school coaching hat. And for the athletes who do have they have school from 7:30 to 3. I don't know, whatever. Every school I talk to the number of schools around here is incredible. But you have school from 7:30 to 3, and that eats up a large chunk of your time. You have obviously practice after school from 4 to 7 or whatever it may be. You have the commuting time to and from practice. You have homework stacked on top of that. You probably have one practice in the mornings on Saturday or Sunday, and you have a lot of time, or a lot of your schedule is taken up by things that are immovable because they are incredibly necessary. I may have said homework. I don't know if I did. I hope I did, right? You have homework because if you don't get good grades, none of this rowing stuff really matters. Like, you probably have tutoring sessions maybe for SATs or whatever classes that you're, trying to get a little bit better with. You have family commitments, all these different things, right? Time with friends, right? I mean, that's the last one I'm thinking of, right? Like, you have all these different things that eat up that time. And then you also have those, 5 or 6 sessions that you're doing with your team. And you're an athlete who does want to move the needle forward. And again, I think it's going to be exciting to hear from you as someone who's a college coach who has obviously been through all that, right? As a student athlete, whether it was rowing or not, right? Like, basketball, you name it, like, you still have to take ownership of your time in order to incorporate a little bit of extra work to push yourself ahead. My philosophy. I'm a morning person. I think, hey, like, if you can wake up at 5:30 2 days a week, go right downstairs, hop on the erg at 5:45, be done by 6:30, and in the shower by 6:15, or in the shower by 6:45 to get ready for 7:30 school. Like, if you can make that work, sign me up twice a week, right? Like, do it twice a week. Don't have to do it 5 days a week, but do it twice a week. That's always going to be my go-to. Not many athletes are built like that. And rightfully, wrongfully, whatever, they probably got better grades than me in school, right? So they should spend that time focusing on studies, right? But some of them do want to do that, right? Some of them do want to figure out when is the time when I can have flexibility in my schedule at the most, but still carve that path out for myself, right? I always kind of tell athletes, hey, if you can do it, those morning sessions, it doesn't have to be every day, but can it be twice a week? Right? Steady. And I think as soon as you get through that barrier to entry of being a morning person and learning how to train in the morning, you'll actually realize very quickly it becomes an energizer for you. It actually makes your day a little bit clearer, right? You have clarity because you're beyond just that initial phase of like, okay, this is a drag on me. The other one is weekend opportunities, right? Maybe it's Saturday afternoon. Maybe you are doing something lighter on Sunday. There's nothing wrong with 7 days a week if you are monitoring intensity, right? Like, if it's just an easy shakedown row, like, you can get a Sunday erg, right? Long-winded way of asking, like, what for you, as you put that hat on as a high school coach or a high school advisor for a younger athlete out there, whoever it may be, where they do have all that time eaten up, what would be your advice to them if they're trying to move the needle forward a little bit on their own?
Yeah. I'm also a morning person. So if you can make a morning work, again, without like sacrificing sleep, if you went to bed real late the night before, maybe don't force it, right? Like, especially for a high school athlete, the sleep's going to be really important. Another spot, and every school is different, every program's different, but more than likely you've got this really random little bit of gap between when school ends and practice starts. Sometimes it's short, if you're in winter season and the erg room is at school and, school lets out at 3 and maybe practice starts at 3:30, it's a short gap. But one way that you can add some extra aerobic exercise is you can warm up a little bit before practice. Maybe it's that you're going to hit a really nice light erg or hit the bike, for 40 minutes in your weird gap time in between, where it's easy. You're not like, pushing it, but you're getting yourself warmed up and ready for practice. Or maybe it's a little bit after practice, like the cool down aspect. If you have like that 45 minutes or so to spare, we actually have a few athletes who have been doing that on Wednesday afternoons. We usually cross train. And I've been noticing there's been like a small group that's been going and hopping on the bikes when we finish our cross training session just to get a few more minutes in. So you can be creative with like the beginning and ending of your practices. If you're not waiting for a ride or, your parents don't have to be somewhere, if you have some flexibility around those times, that's a spot that I would think about. if I remember back to my high school time, I mostly played basketball. And we would have practice. We would alternate with the boys with gym time. So some days we had the gym time that was right after school. So you'd literally go change and go in the gym. But some days we had 5 p.m. practice because the boys had the early slot. So what am I doing between school let out at like 2:30, 3 o'clock and 5? I might not drive home. I lived 20 minutes from school. So sometimes I stayed and I would do homework. I might go get something to eat. But like there was like that large gap in there. So by I think it was my junior and senior year of high school, I actually started going to this place that was right around the road from my high school, Summit Sports Training Center. And we would do, lifting and conditioning. And I would go 3 times a week. I would go after school. And then I would go to practice after that. And that might sound like crazy, like you're doing a lot, but that was the level that my high school basketball team was at. They were so good. Everyone was so skilled and so dedicated to what they were doing. Like you kind of had to. Like if you wanted to compete, you had to put some extra time in. So that was the first time in my life where I understood the value of that. And like, okay, why is this person getting so much stronger and faster than me? Because they're going and lifting for an hour before they even touch a basketball at school. And like, that's where I was like, whoa, okay, there's a whole other level to this of like people who want to be really good at what they're doing. So at times you might feel like you're on an island. You might have a lot of friends who say, what are you doing? Why don't we just go hang out? Why don't we go to Wawa, sit in the parking lot, shoot the shit. I don't know if we're allowed to curse on here, but, and that's fun too, socializing and all of that. But like you said, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, could you forego social hour to get a few extra minutes in? You probably can. And you'd be surprised how being consistent with that over 6 months, over a year, how much faster you could get.
And I love that. And we're going to dive into that because I think that's, again, like that's the underlying message of, in many ways, what I help athletes do, what I know you're very passionate about. Like it sometimes takes a little bit more. It actually always takes a little bit more, right? Because most high school programs, especially, right? And again, college programs are a little bit more like, hey, their schedules are centered around being a Division I athlete, right? Where you have those lift sessions blocked out your schedule. You have obviously the practices in the morning, which free up so much of your day, right? I'm going to ask you about that here in a second. But at the end of the day, the underlying message is it takes a little bit more, but it shouldn't take so much more where it is now taking from all the other important things that are in your life, right? It shouldn't take away from the homework time. It shouldn't take away from, your time with your tutoring sessions or with, your time with whatever, right? Can it take away a little bit of that social hour, right? With the friends, right? Can it take away a little bit from, whatever you use, after school to wind down, right? Netflix, whatever, like TikTok, I don't know, like, yeah, in many ways, like, yeah, it does require a little bit of sacrifice. And one of the things that I talked a lot about this weekend up in Boston to the parents that would stop by is, and I didn't even message this to them. They would kind of bring it up. It's like, hey, he loves to work hard. He loves to train. She loves to, she's doing extra workouts on Yerg. I'm like, let's go. That's it. Right. Like the athletes to me who have, I'm not going to say like success in terms of like, hey, they're now the future Olympians and this and that. I don't know. That's not my market, right? Like, I want athletes who want to be the best position they can to have success at the college level and be a 4-year contributor at whatever program they decide to pursue. Like those are the athletes that I really like to work with because they understand the value of hard work and training, and they want to take it to the next level because they see that there's so much that can come from being a college rower, which there is. There's so much truth to that. But what I always tell those parents or the athletes is if you're rooted in training rather than being rooted, like your internal motivation for doing this sport is grounded and rooted through the fact that you love to train, you love to work hard. The question is, how can you do a little bit more to get ahead rather than being fixated on, I just want to be in the top boat, or I just want to get a scholarship, or I want my 2K down to, 745 so I can get recruited to a D1 school. And it's all face value, external motivations, rather than, hey, like, I love to work hard, sign me up. The erg is something that I appreciate. It's fun to me because I love seeing that number go down. I love seeing myself improve. To me, like, those athletes, the ones who you have to talk them down rather than have to build them up, sign me up for those athletes any day. Like, those are the athletes that I think are truly going to be successful as D1 rowers, as college rowers. And whether that gets on the scorecard or not, because in terms of winning races and things like that, I don't know, right? Like, that's out of your control. That's not my primary concern. My primary concern is that you are getting there. But talk to me a little bit about that, because I know you're someone who loves to train. I know you're someone who's not afraid to wake up a little bit early and get some training in. Talk a little bit about, okay, like, just in two parts to it, but like maybe some things that help you have the consistency to wake up in the morning motivated to get a workout in, or unmotivated, but you still do it anyway. And then also maybe dive into a little bit, because I know you're wired this way too, like that rooted in training type mentality that I know is probably the primary reason why you're not afraid to run a marathon, twice a year. You're not afraid to wake up and train and exercise and get on the erg and stuff like that. Like, elaborate on that. Unpack that for me. I know I just went on a rant there, as I always do, but unpack that for me.
Yeah. People like to joke about the idea of staying ready so you don't have to get ready. But I think that that's a little bit of my mentality, like keeping my fitness at such a level that at any time I can say, okay, I'm going to train for a marathon. I'm going to train for, a specific event. I can like dive right into that. I don't have to then like build myself up to the fitness level to be able to train for whatever it is. I'm kind of always ready. Like, I rode in Carol's alumni boat this weekend at the Charles, and some of my athletes were asking me about it. Like, oh, like, are you ready? I'm like, yeah, I'm fit. I'm not worried about it. Like, I can get in a boat any day of the week and do it. Now, it might not be like my absolute best rowing. It would be probably better if I rowed a little bit more beforehand, but I think, but that's training. So when you're in a training sport, when you're in an endurance sport, there is a certain level that you kind of need to keep your body at, functioning at, because when you drop below that level, the ramp up that it takes to get yourself back in the physical state to be able to handle the load of training, it's a lot on your body. And to go like up and down, that can cause injury. It can cause overtraining, burnout, all of that. And I know it's really hard for young athletes to understand, because the lure of taking time off is so great. And I remember, like, when I was younger too, high school and maybe even early in college, the idea of like, oh, I get to just take a break sounded kind of nice. But think about how you feel when you come off of taking a break where you've really done nothing. You hurt for a couple of weeks. Like, it's not fun getting back into it. And then you kind of want to back off because you're hurting. So you back it off, and the time it takes to like move forward is so long, because that, your body is tired, because you took your foot off the gas for a little bit too long. So if you keep yourself at a certain level of fitness all year, you might not always be training hard, like you might be doing a little bit more like leisure exercise at some times during the year, but you're keeping yourself at such a level that if tomorrow you said, okay, head of the Charles is in 6 weeks, I'm ready. I can go and get right into that training. And I wish that more athletes understood that aspect of it, because that's kind of like the summer break. Don't just sit around all summer, because then you are going to spend all of September and October building yourself back to where now we can train. Whereas coaches all over the country want to be able to start training in September. However, if you did nothing all summer, your body is not ready for that level. So that's a motivation for me behind it, is that I hate that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm sore, I'm tired, this sucks. So I'm just going to like keep myself at such a level that like I never have to encounter that feeling. And otherwise, a lot of my motivation behind, getting up early and moving my body is just like you said earlier, I feel so good afterwards. I coach better. I get through like my work during the day quicker. I'm more efficient so that, when it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't have to continue to go through my email because I got it done early in the day and now I can kind of like relax. So that's part of my motivation is I might feel like crap when I first wake up and not want to, but I think about, I'm going to feel so much better afterwards. I'm going to feel like dialed in for my day afterwards. And that's more what I focus on is like, all right, let's work through this to get to that feeling.
Yeah. And I think like again, like that's, I think this is something that you and I are both passionate about. We've talked about it hours in the garage, out for hours in the garage, this past summer. We talk about it all the time whenever we get a chance. Like, it's just, again, like creating those habits and creating those routines that can help, just like you said, always be ready, stay ready, so that whatever encounter comes up, like it doesn't have to mean the intensity always has to be, falling off. Like it doesn't mean you always, or sorry, it doesn't mean the intensity always has to be at the highest, right? Where now you're dragging throughout the day. It's like, but can you add in a little bit of, just really prioritize the habits that you have, right? And that's where, again, I think the morning sessions are incredibly valuable, where it's like, hey, like you get past those first couple of weeks where it is a little bit of a drag, soon it's going to be a new fire for you, because it's like, okay, like I got in a good sweat today. We all know how we feel after a good workout, right? It's not that intensity. It's going to really push you underneath where you can't focus in school or you're not ready for practice. It's enough that helps energize you and is a motivator for you. And, that's another, I think that's one of the biggest things that I really think that athletes can get a lot of value. It's like, hey, like look at your routines or look at your habits and how can you truly begin to incorporate and stay consistent with it, so that, again, those micro little changes can lead to big results long term. And that's another thing. I know we only have a couple minutes here, but I have this written down and I want to bring it up. But we were exchanging some messages. You're a big reader and so am I. And we talked about atomic habits, and I texted it to you mainly because I have this piece of paper that I wrote out back in June when I read the book. And right when I was texting you right when I was texting you ideas to talk about today, I saw it and it was like the Plateau of Latent Potential. And this is something that in the summer, in this past summer, it was one of the June sessions, because that's when I was reading the book. You weren't there until July because you had obviously what you're doing in Eastern Michigan. But I brought this up, the Plateau of Latent Potential. And the reason I bring it up today is like, hey, like you referenced it a little bit before, but like putting in those little, or the consistent effort. And at times it may not feel like you are realizing that you're seeing it on paper, but understanding that what you're doing is you're building this backlog of consistent effort, consistent training, so that at one point, when you kind of get out of this quote unquote from the book valley of disappointment, you start to realize exponential change in your training. And that's one of the big things. I know we're just bringing it up here at the end, as I know you got stuff to get on with the rest of your fall, but like the Plateau of Latent Potential and how it correlates with the effort that you put in, and maybe not seeing it in the winter early on, or maybe through the fall, right? You might be like, why am I doing all this work? I wanted to bring that up here because, again, like it talks about that, the effort that you're putting in up front, the groundwork that you're laying up front, like you feel like it should be linear, directly correlated, right? Work you put in is what you're going to see on the other side. But in reality, it's not. In reality, you're putting in all this work, and eventually there's going to be this little segment here, right? If you're talking linear, where you're not seeing any results, right? Your erg score is not dropping the way you thought it was. You didn't PR as much as you thought you were on that last 6K. But you've been putting in all this work leading up to it. You thought that it would materialize and you'd be now that person in the top boat because of all the work that you put in. Talk a little bit more about consistency and that plateau that maybe athletes are feeling and the need to maybe just hold it down for a little bit longer, because at some point in the future, maybe January, maybe February, maybe March, right before spring season, eventually you're going to see that return on the other side, and you're going to truly know what it feels like to realize progress from hard work. I know I had to bring it up because, again, it's on that piece of paper that's right in front of me. I've been thinking about it since June, but think about that consistency and progress. Unpack that for me.
Yeah. One, great book. So if there are readers listening that haven't read it, read it. Really good for adults, high school, college. Great book. You actually made me think of, I just heard this recently and it resonated really well with me. And it's exactly this. So when you watch a house getting built, for a while, it looks like nothing's happening, right? Like they're moving the dirt around, they're laying the concrete, the foundation, and it's like weeks and weeks. And you're like, when's the house going to get built? And they're laying the groundwork. And then all of a sudden you drive by one day and like the whole house is built, right? Like the framework's up, and then they're putting the siding up, they're putting the roof up, and all of a sudden the house goes up real quick. But those first couple of weeks seem like there's nothing happening. That's sort of how I think of, especially winter training. When you make that initial transition off the water, you're going to get on the erg, and you're not going to immediately just shoot up to, your all-time PR. You're just not. You're also coming down off of a season where your body does need probably a little bit of like a rollback and like, let's relax so that we can start hitting training hard again. So you're going to be in that like what did you call it? The valley of despair.
Valley of disappointment.
Yeah. You feel like you're not going anywhere, but you have to kind of trust that you're laying groundwork, right? Like you're kind of setting the tone for like February, March. That's when, if you're training well through the winter season, February, March, right before you hit the water again in the spring, that's when you want to see that big jump. And it's really hard because you're going to hit those points, in December and January and even in early February where you're stuck on, maybe it's like, I've pulled the same split now. The last 2 times I tested, what's going on? Why am I not breaking through? And instead of trying to then go at it harder, like you don't necessarily have to hammer harder in those moments. Sometimes you just have to trust the training. Like show up the next day, train the session at the desired intensity level, hit your numbers, like continue to just be consistent. Trust the consistency, trust the training, and know that if you're doing all of that and you're recovering, you're taking care of yourself outside of the 2 hours that you're training with your team, you're going to see the breakthrough eventually. You will. But you have to trust it. I think a lot of athletes get really caught up in those plateaus though. And they get so frustrated that either they try to hit it too hard then to try to just like bust through, and they overtrain a little and overtax themselves a little. And then, you're even more disappointed because you're like, I just worked 10 times harder and went backwards. So the answer is not always to hammer it. Like the answer is usually just to like wait it out. Like it's coming, trust it, and try not to mentally kind of barrage yourself with negative thoughts around your performance and who you are because of a number. So those are hard though. It's really hard until you've experienced enough in a sport like this. Like, you've experienced it, I've experienced it because we've now been training for a long, long time where, what, eventually I'm going to bounce out of this. Like I'm just kind of in a little bit of a hole and it sucks. Like you hate being in it, but you're going to come out of it because you've done it before. But some of these athletes, they've never seen that before. Your novice year is like a giant up curve, right? And it's so fun because every time you get on the machine, you get faster and faster and faster. Then you get to your second year and you get a little faster, and then you get to your third year and you're like, man, where's my 20-second PR? And like you have to kind of go through it, and the first time you experience one of those plateaus, you're like, what's wrong? What happened? Nothing's wrong. It's normal. But the alarm bells start going off. So if you're in that spot, if you're a young athlete, you're not the first one to hit this spot. You're going to come out of it. Try not to dig yourself into a deep mental hole of like beating up on yourself. So that's my thought on it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that, and oh man, I'm sad that we waited till the end for me to bring that up, because again, I just think we could do a whole podcast on that. Like, that's one of those books that really resonates, and is interesting because, again, like, regardless of whether it's your athletic career, academic career, your professional career, like there's so much good practice that kind of comes with that, and that plateau of latent potential is literally right in the beginning. It's like in the first 10 pages. I'm like, yo, I'm going to like this, right? Because this resonates for anything, right? This resonates for business, for professional life, for academics, for getting better grades in school, right? You may not see it right on paper in the beginning, but if you keep putting in the time, if you keep putting in those extra meters, you're going to see it on the other end at some point. It may not be on the surface right in the beginning, but you keep logging those meters, you keep working on the strength, you keep doing the core work and the mobility. Those little things, even when you are in that valley of disappointment, which is going to exist for everyone, especially when you're up where we are in the Northeast or out Midwest, like when it's cold and you are inside for long periods, it's going to be tough. It's going to be miserable at times, but can you trust it and can you stay on it, right? So that's a big thing. But before we wrap things up, the other really key takeaway, because we may never bring this book up again, we may also bring it up again, but the other key takeaway that's on my mind now, again, I haven't read it since June, but one of the things they talked about was never miss twice. And that's one that I use all the time with athletes, where it's like, never miss twice. Meaning, hey, if you miss this day, right? Like yesterday, getting home from the Charles at 12 o'clock, 1 a.m., after, putting in 7:30 to 5:30 every day at the course, talking to coaches, this and that. Yesterday, I happened to miss a day of exercise. I was really upset with myself because it was probably the first day in a long time. I was getting there, even at the Charles, I was waking up at 4 o'clock to get in a hotel workout. But I missed yesterday. I was really upset about it. Which, there's whatever problems with that, right? Hey, sometimes you miss a day. But I was like, hey, like today I'm not going to miss, right? So I got on the erg, right? A couple hours ago before we logged on here, right? And it's like, hey, like I haven't been on the erg in a while because I've been away for the last couple of days. I wanted to erg yesterday, I didn't, but never miss twice. Get it in today, right? Get your 12K in today, whatever it is, right? Does whatever intensity it is. And that's one that really resonates to me as well. It's like, you're going to miss a day. The challenge to yourself is never miss twice. Can you immediately have that little light go off in your head that makes it this new sense of urgency to get it the next day and make sure that you get it the next day, right? You miss that extra session, that extra erg that you normally do on Saturday afternoons or Thursday mornings. Okay, I missed it. I slept in, or I, took a nap after practice. I didn't want to do it, right? Whatever the reason is, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to get the next one. It may not be optimal. I may be a little bit tired, but I'm going to get it, right? I'm going to get that next one. Check the box, right? Which we talked about in episode 1 over a year ago, right? So with that, Delaney, my last thing for you, right, as we wrap things up and you get on with what you got in store. Again, we could talk about that last topic for 2 hours. Oh man. But with that, 2 questions for you. Number one, are you reading anything now or have a recommendation? If we're talking about books, which we rarely do, is there something that's on your mind now that you would recommend to a high school athlete, a college athlete, whoever? Could be anything, right? You don't have to be necessarily reading it now. And then lastly, just give us a little bit about, what's in store for you guys and what we can do to help you, or what athletes can do to find a little bit more about you as we close things out and get you on with the rest of your week.
Yeah. Oh, book. That's a good question. I will be honest, I've been slacking a little bit on my reading lately. It's tough for me in season. I struggle, like in the summer, in the off season, I can get on a tear. And then when we get busy, it gets tough. I'm looking over here at these books that I have. I'm going to rain check you on that. Let me answer your second question and come back around.
Something might come up while you're talking.
Yeah. So up next for us, we've got home race this weekend against Dayton. And then we've got one more week on the water. And then we transitioned into kind of our off-season 8-hour weeks in November. So we'll be on the erg. And then the next big thing on the calendar for us after that is spring training in Alabama at the end of February. So, so we're going like into winter hibernation here for a couple of months, which actually I'm looking forward to. I think most coaches look forward to it a little bit. Like at the end of the fall, you're like, I'm tired. I'm like ready to just go inside and focus on training. And, but to loop back to a book, I just recommended it to one of my athletes. It's called A Champion's Mind. I forget the author, but a really great book with a lot of tools on like the mental side of high performance, and a lot of good examples from like great athletes in all different sports and different techniques that they use to either get themselves dialed in for, a big performance, a big competition, ways that they talk to themselves in training that then, sets themselves up for success when they do have to like hit the performance stage or competition stage. But that's a good one. I read it in college actually, and then I reread it a few years after graduating. But I remember when I read it in college, it had a huge impact on just the way that I approached my own training. I think I read it in between my junior and senior year at St. Joe's, and with the idea in mind that I wanted to kind of get like an edge on how can I train a little bit better to get a little bit faster, to move towards the goals that I had for myself at the time. And it was very helpful. So especially for young athletes, another one along those lines is called Mind Gym. That's a shorter one. I've heard about that one. Yeah, I've heard that one. That one's not bad either. So, but both have really good like nuggets of information on like the mental side of things. So, yeah. Love
it. So Champion's Mind and then Mind Gym. The Champion's Mind is the first one, right? Okay.
Yep.
Well, yeah. So for those that are making it to this point in the podcast, which hopefully you are, then we have those there, right? So, but no, Delaney, this was awesome as always. This is, these are just the easiest conversations in the world because we do them all the time. And it can range from training to recruiting to just talking about performance habits that we integrate in our own lives for whatever our own personal goals are, right? Like, I always have a blast. So, with that, I know you got stuff to do. Last thing, where can athletes find you? I know you got Instagram and all that. Where can athletes find you if they want to get in touch with you? I know you guys are making some moves over there at EMU, but give us that last little piece and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah. Instagram at Coach D_MCG. Yeah, I think.
We'll throw it in the, we'll throw it in the show notes. It'll be in the show notes.
Or at EMU Rowing as well. If you're a high school junior or even a senior who's still undecided, you can email me directly. I think Kevin can probably even link my email in the show notes as well. But you can find it online if you just search EMU Rowing. Fill out our recruiting questionnaire.
Very cool. All right, Delaney. Well, good luck as you guys close out with the last race of the season. It's good to get a little Charles recap as well and dive into that a little bit. I think there's some great stuff in this episode as always. With that, good luck as you guys wrap up and get ready for winter training. I'll be keeping in tune. I'm excited for you to get back to Philly at some point in the winter so we can get on the erg and get back in the garage. But with that, good luck as you guys close things out, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Kevin.